It was one of the hottest days of the summer, and I had a meeting in my office that lacked air conditioning. The request for the meeting came as a letter instead of a text or email, which I thought was odd. I assumed the letter came from an elderly person who didn't have enough of a grasp of technology to send a message the easy way, but that didn't explain why they didn't call, or how they found my address in the first place. It was strange, but I was too drained from the heat to overthink it. I made the way up the flight of creaky wooden stairs to my rented office. I paused to clean my face of sweat before reaching down to unlock the door, only to find it already unlocked. A surge of fear came through my body, as someone was obviously already inside. I hoped this was some sort of corporation job and that I wasn't in danger, but I regretted not bringing my handgun with me. It was too hot for jackets, so I no longer had any way to hide the holster from the regular public. When I walked from my office to my car, I would just take a peek inside, then leave if I saw anything dangerous. I saw something very dangerous. The creature that was inside my office was waiting for me. She had moved my furniture aside to make space for her massive body, her startled face turning towards the door when I opened it. She froze as we both stared each other down. She gave a weak smile filled with teeth. I excused myself for a few seconds to muffle my screaming in the hallway. I got dizzy. The sight of what was in my office forced me to put my hands on my knees and lean over, trying to regain some composure. I had no idea what a thing like her was doing here, or what she wanted, or hell, how she had even heard about me. But she was polite enough not to eat me the moment we made eye contact, so I should at least hear her out, opening the door for a second time. I was using all my willpower not to scream as all of her eyes landed on mine. The creature that was in my office was a spider woman. I suppose if you could get past the spider back end. She was attractive. Long black hair that had a purple shine to it reached the floor. She was wearing a cashmere sweater over her human half, and I could tell she wasn't used to wearing clothing. The material kept riding up and she struggled to keep it down. Her well-endowed chest was almost enough to distract me from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, and no amount of womanly charms would overpower how my skin crawled when I saw her jaw was segmented. It was almost like a hinge, her mouth reaching from ear to ear. Thousands of sharp teeth glittered as she spoke, and two pincers somewhat hidden under her hair near her ears shifted. I've heard you're a private detective, but that you have also worked with agents to solve cases. She started. Her voice was very sweet, but she was still a spider, a big one. Her spider legs tapped on the hardwood floor nervously. My shoulders tensed at the sight. I was seconds away from running from the room. When I only nodded, she kept speaking. My name is Charlotte. Last night my son did not return home. He is able to attain a human form, and I fear something has happened to him. I suppose he was off exploring the human side of things, going to what you humans call bars. Honestly, if he had just told me what he was doing, I wouldn't have minded, but without warning, tears stared to come to her two main and larger eyes, and the rest of her smaller ones looked a bit misty. She used her sweater to dab her tears. It was a losing battle. My fear went down to a manageable level as she let out hiccuping sobs. I found a box of tissues on my desk and handed it to her. Take your time and tell me what's wrong, I said, after she apologized for her outburst. I fear I've been a terrible mother. I was too strict on him, and now my little darling has gone off. I kept telling him we would go together to show him how humans lived, but I was so scared of anything happening I kept putting it off. I suppose he was frustrated and went off on his own, but I just want to know he's safe. He can go off and live his own life away from his overprotective mother. I just want to know he's still alive. I couldn't do anything for her as she started to go into another fit of sobs. It took a little while to get the rest of the information I needed for this job. Her son, Lily, looked to be in her early 20s. He would blend in easily with the bar crowd aside from being a bit naive. He did have access to money because Charlotte earned it from selling her silk to the hunters and the corporation. Her species would take human males as partners. Their sons would be half-breeds. But oddly enough, the females didn't have any human DNA passed down. It was normal for the sons to go off into human society after they came of age. Sometimes they stayed with their mothers though. Charlotte wanted to keep her son at home for as long as possible, and it backfired. She didn't have a photo of him, but had gotten a drawn portrait done when he was a little younger. It should be enough to give me an idea of what he looked like. Apparently, the sons of this species were extremely handsome, so he wouldn't be all too hard to find. Charlotte could create a transportation spell to bring me to the city she thought he would most likely be in. I thought everything was arranged and got prepared to get started when she stopped me, asking what the payment should be. That was a difficult conversation. Supernatural creatures lived in a culture of favors where nothing was free. She did have money, but I would rather it go to her son until he could earn his own. If he was safe, that is. I was perfectly fine doing this job for free. But that was something Charlotte couldn't wrap her head around. In the end, I told her we could put off discussion of payment until a later date, fully knowing I would never ask anything from her. My savings account was looking fine, and I didn't have anything planned, so I had time to spare. I'm sure there are some people out there that would kill to have a spider woman owe them for something, but I wasn't the type. Although I fear if Charlotte wasn't part spider, I would maybe take her up on her offer of anything, and did not like that side of myself. I half-jokingly worry that I might end up with a monster girlfriend instead of a regular human if these kinds of jobs kept up. Charlotte dropped me off while remaining unseen herself. She really wanted to go with me but couldn't risk going out in a heavily populated city. Normally, humans couldn't see her or interact with supernatural creatures. However, hunters could see them either by their own increased sense for the supernatural or by using magic. Creatures of the night were attracted by big cities to hunt for food, and that attracted hunters. Charlotte did not want to risk coming across one. My fear of spiders aside, she really was a kind-hearted being who did not want to fight a hunter who might want to kill her for just being in the area. I promised her I would do my best, and she left so I could start gathering up information. First, I checked to see what the popular local bars and clubs were located. A sheltered son would probably go to those first. I worried about his safety if he was already out drinking for the night. He might be dead in a ditch somewhere from alcohol poisoning or something. He was not in a hospital, arrested, or in the morgue. Any supernatural creatures that showed up there would be noticed and swiftly removed either by the corporation or other local agency. Honestly, I learned a lot from my new client, even after dealing with the supernatural for a few months now. I didn't know much. I made a list of places to check out when they opened. I killed some time asking around local hotels and motels with Ellie's portrait to see if any of the receptionists had seen him around, due to privacy concerns. Most people didn't want to answer any of my questions. I assured them I didn't want his room number, only if he had been spotted safe and sound recently. After that, people tended to go along saying they hadn't seen him but would make a note if they did. At least that line of questioning killed some time. When it started to get late in the day, the bars opened. I wanted to hit each location before it got too busy and prayed the staff that had worked last night would be working again. Everyone was pretty helpful once they knew I was looking for a clueless guy with a worried mother. Some said they saw him in passing, but none knew where he ended up or who he was with. He just got accepted into groups by paying for drinks, and then moved on. The bartenders only remembered Lee because of how he looked. Aside from being handsome, they could all sense there was something off about him. It gave them conflicted feelings. Everyone who had an interaction with him got the impression he was a nice guy who wouldn't hurt a fly, but at the same time, he didn't appear natural, almost like a feeling that he was too perfect and just couldn't be real. I understood their conflicted emotions. Charlotte was beautiful, and yet I felt like her species ate humans. Even if there hadn't been that many over her lifespan, she was still a predator, something above us on the food chain. Our bodies knew it by instinct. I thanked each person who gave me scraps of information and moved on to the next bar. I was spending a great deal in taxi fares, but it would be worth it to put Charlotte's mind at ease. It was getting late and I was running out of places to hit up. I felt as if I wasn't really getting anywhere. Nick's words about effort never being wasted kept me going. I was dropped off at a crowded club where you could hear the music blaring, even outside. It was not a place I would normally go into, and I wasn't even dressed for a club like this. I assumed the bouncer would toss me out, but I guess I looked as if I wasn't there to cause trouble and got inside. How anyone enjoyed being in clubs was beyond me. I couldn't hear myself think, and could easily feel the music thud in my chest. I struggled through a mass of bodies to get to the bar, hoping I could ask questions over the noise. It was dark. The only lights surrounding the DJ stage were shining in hues of purple and pink. The place was really awful. It smelled terrible, and I wanted to ask my questions and get out of there as soon as possible. Shouting over the noise, I got the poor overworked bartender's attention. I gave him a tip and struggled to ask him if he'd seen Lee around over the noise in the club. He gave me a puzzled look. I was about to repeat the question thinking he didn't hear me. The man pointed behind me, then went to a very loud and demanding girl screaming for a drink. I turned trying to see what the bartender was pointing at and did a double take. I stared, slack-jawed, thinking it couldn't be this easy. In the middle of the crowd of the dance floor had turned into a mob since the time I had entered the club. Was someone being lifted up? They were cheering while he downed the biggest drink I'd ever seen in one large swig. It was Lee. Honestly, I didn't know how I was going to drag him away from that crowd. I hurried over to try and push through, finding it impossible. This jerk was partying, and his poor mother was sobbing, worrying about him. He could have at least called. I bet he had probably blown through all the cash Charlotte had saved up for him to start his new life away from home in one night. Somehow, I got his attention till he directed his perfect face in my direction, looking hazy when I raised the drawing for him to see. His expression turned a bit sober, knowing the only way I would have that is if I knew his mother. At least he didn't run. Both of us struggled through the crowd. We wanted to get outside, but it was blocked and went to the washrooms instead. The music was still thudding, but it was low enough to hold a conversation. All the stall doors were closed and the place looked disgusting. Billy, do you have any idea how worried your mother is about you? I hissed while keeping a grip on his arm. Billy was swaying a little and had a half grin on his face. His attention kept getting pulled away by something I couldn't see. Don't worry about it. It's only been a few hours. Hey, you want some of these? He was digging around trying to get his hand in his pocket and failing. Are you high? Ugh, it doesn't matter. I'm taking you home. I understand wanting to have fun, but this isn't safe. I tried dragging him, but his feet stayed as if he was glued to the floor. I was dealing with a half-human after all. He wasn't dangerous in his blissful state, but wouldn't move unless I got him motivated. God, I wished I could just slap him. I could try, but doubted I could do enough damage to knock any sense into whatever was hidden under all the drugs and booze he took. I wondered what I could do. Lure him away with promises of fast food. I didn't know how to call Charlotte, so I had agreed to meet her where she dropped me off in the morning. But I wasn't just going to leave Billy to ruin himself further. Finally, my words sunk in and a confused look came over his face. He scratched at his straight black hair, trying to figure out what I was saying. How isn't this safe? It's just human nonsense. It's not as if any of them can hurt me. And he trailed off, noticing his own reflection. Thinking it was a different person, he smiled and waved at it. Then noticed me again and got back on his train of thought. Oh, right. All this stuff wears off so fast. I can take whatever I want and have fun. No problem. It's just fun. Mother was always going on about hunters, but I'll just chomp them. To my horror, Lily's face shifted. It was no longer perfect with handsome features, but twisted into a monstrous face with a mouth so wide it unhinged at his ears. Eyes lined his forehead and cheeks, looking a bit drunk but still dangerous. His hands wrapped around my shoulders, keeping me in place as I let out a yelp of fear, trying to push away, each hand looking as if it should belong to a ball-jointed doll instead of a human. He shut his mouth twice with an audible snap, while he made cartoonish chomping sounds. He was giggling, making his appearance seem a smidge less threatening. Billy wasn't going to eat my face. He was only showing me that he could do it to anyone who tried to harm him. He might be able to defend himself against a regular human, but I feared he wouldn't stand a chance against a hunter. I'd only heard about them and had never met one before. They were on par with the corporation despite being run solely by humans. Billy was a half-breed and high as a kite. He wouldn't be able to deal with someone trying to hunt him down. I was pushing my hand against his cheek, trying to get him away while not poking his eyes out, and angrily telling him he should not be showing that face in public. I now wonder if I had used up all my good luck by finding Illy so quickly. I thought about the horrible outcome that would result if a hunter came across Illy, but never imagined it would actually happen. As I was trying to talk some sense into Illy, a man about our age walked into the washroom. He froze, staring at us. My mind was racing as I tried to explain what was going on and if I could even attempt to play this all off. In a flash, the man's hands went to under his jacket, and he pulled out a black rod as he charged at Illy. When he slammed it down on his shoulder, a burst of electricity flew out, but it strangely didn't harm me. Illy was blown back, knocked out from that single hit, but not dead. I acted slowly out of shock. The man assumed he saved me from nearly being eaten, and if I was smarter, I would have played it off like that was the case. Instead, I rushed over to Illy to check on him, looking him over to see if he was all right. The hunter, who thought was saving an innocent human, looked disgusted by my concern. "How dare you go over to their side?" the man shouted, his face twisted in rage. I threw up my arms, trying to defend myself. This man didn't need any special magic weapons. He just needed one well-placed punch to my face to knock me out cold. In my defense, he was someone who devoted their life to training to fight supernatural creatures. It was only natural I would get knocked out so fast. When I woke up, my head was throbbing and I was certain my nose was broken again. Dried blood stuck my shirt to my chest. How this hunter got both Illy and myself out of the club without drawing attention to himself was a mystery. My head still hazy, I tried moving, only to find out I was tied down. It took a few minutes to clear my head and look around. The room looked to be an old warehouse converted into a living space, where the hunter that took us had cluttered desks and workspaces filling the space, each desk covered in items to craft supernatural weapons. Most were body parts from creatures. A massive clawed hand hung from one table and my stomach dropped. Was Illy safe? I frantically looked around the room and finally spotted him, tied up but alive, in the middle of a circle drawn on the cement flooring. He looked sober, and met my gaze, his face looking terrified and yet sorry that he dragged a second person into all this. Before I could call out to him, the hunter returned. He sneered when he noticed we both were awake. "Please, let Ellie go. He's not dangerous, just stupid," I said quickly. The man who kidnapped us didn't want to listen. His face colored in rage over how a human was defending a creature. I'd heard hunters hated creatures of the night, but never really realized what that meant. Not dangerous. Every creature is dangerous and should not be allowed to live. He spat, looking disgusted. I stared at him, my chest hurting from fear. Whatever happened to this hunter in the past must have been terrible for him to have this kind of outlook. Overall, he had a kind face under the cruel expression that was currently on it. He didn't look to be the type to go out hunting monsters. If that was the case, wouldn't humans be wiped out? I've seen some terrible creatures, but also I was cut off from trying to reason with him when the hunter walked over and grabbed the front of my shirt. They only let us live for food. We are nothing to them. The only reason why our world is this way is because they let it be. I am not going to keep letting this happen, and I cannot forgive anyone who sides with them. He was shouting, but his voice wavered a little. There was a sadness under his rage. I couldn't move and felt helpless, honestly. I should hate this man, but couldn't bring myself to do so. I just wanted to figure out a way to get Ellie back to his mother. The hunter shoved me aside to pace around the desks looking at the half-finished weapons. I'm going to use this creature to create weapons to kill his kind. These weapons can backfire. I needed someone to test them out on, but never came across someone insane enough to side with monsters. You'll do just fine. Hell, you might redeem yourself by dying while I test these weapons so I can kill more creatures. That explained why this man took both of us. I assumed he took Ellie to pull any magic from his body, but didn't know why I was dragged along. Ellie had heard stories about hunters, so he knew what to expect when being captured by one. Ellie only grew frantic when he heard I was going to be killed. He struggled, trying to get to the edge of the circle, sweating but unable to move further. "Please, let this man go. I don't even know his name. My mother asked him to find me. That's all. He's not a part of anything. He's just doing his job," he begged, and I thought a little better of him. The hunter wasn't moved in the slightest. He walked over and easily crossed into the circle to kick Ellie to the ground. He forced the half-breed down with his foot, pressing Ellie's face into the cement. I shouted at him to stop, and that didn't help my case at all. There are wards to keep this place safe from your kind. However, if you call for your monster of a mother, I may consider letting this human go. What is it going to be? Let a human die because of your mistake, or let your mother die? We all knew the choice Ellie was going to make. His face reflected his agony over being made to make one. He had ran off, just wanting to blow off steam. And now he was going to be torn apart to create weapons and had dragged another person down with him. I needed to think of something. I looked around, trying to see if there was something within arm's reach I could grab with my hands tied behind my back. Ellie may be half monster, but he was being overpowered by magic. Our only hope was if the hunter underestimated me and left something nearby I could use. I doubted we could talk ourselves out of this mess. I felt my cell phone in my pocket but couldn't reach it, even if I could, unless the hunter left us alone. I couldn't call for help without drawing his attention. I work for the corporation. I don't think they would approve of you killing one of their agents. I bluffed. It was a little bit of a lie. I wasn't an agent, but I did work with them. I knew Anker would love it if I died here. I didn't ask Nick for help on this case and regretted that. It should have been an easy case. If I lived and he found out, I'm sure he would be very upset with me. I know who are agents and you're. The hunter's words were cut off by a loud cracking sound and the entire building shaking. It felt like a bomb went off. Half-finished weapons fell from the desks, rolling to the floor. He fell over, no longer pinning Ellie down. The half-spider still wasn't able to leave the circle. The hunter scrambled to his feet, looking as scared as I felt. He dove to grab a weapon, just as the large doors on the other side of the building were kicked in so hard that they flew across the room, taking out everything in their path. Instead of a sword or a dagger, the hunter grabbed a piece of paper with circles and writing on it to face the creature that charged inside. I didn't recognize the monster that tore across the room, tossing desks aside effortlessly. I should have from the spider body, but she looked so terrifying I just couldn't see this creature as the same kind and worried mother I'd met hours earlier. Her long hair moved like extra hands, ripping apart the room as her legs sped along the ground. Every eye glowed a deep purple inside black sockets. A mouth opened so wide it could swallow a person's head whole. Another mouth was open vertically down her chest. It started at her collarbone and ended where her human half met her spider one. The spider woman screamed loud enough to break glass, causing me to flinch and shut my eyes in pain. She should have attacked the hunter, but instead she stopped in front of him, her eyes looking at Ellie and then at me. In a split second, Charlotte went from her extra monstrous form to the version I'd seen earlier. The hunter was stunned as she dragged the tip of her foot across the circle drawn on the floor, breaking it to freely. She tore the ropes from him and pressed her son into a tight hug. I was so worried. I thought you were dead, Charlotte cried out, her eyes wet. How did you find this place? The hunter asked, a bit stunned. I put a tracking spell on Skylar, she replied, not taking her eyes off of Ellie. The hunter turned to me, his face twisted in rage. He then faced Charlotte, piece of paper in the air to get her attention. I didn't know what the paper did, but didn't like that he grabbed it instead of a more dangerous-looking weapon. This is a very powerful spell. It'll kill all of us if I let go of it. Walk away and I may consider letting you live, he warned, his hand shaking a little. The threat was valid. He was going to take us all down with him if needed, but he didn't look very keen on the idea. My mind was racing. Charlotte was strong, but I didn't think she could stop the spell unless she knew the exact wording. The man kept a thumb over the last word, making it certain she wouldn't be able to read it and think of a way around the spell. It will kill the three of you. I can survive if that spell goes off. I've fought with you hunters before and have gone through the same thing. Your death would be a waste, but please, even if you don't care about your own life, don't take my son away. Her tone was calm and kind. She turned her full attention onto the hunter and carefully placed Lee behind her large body. I knew it hurt her to not comfort her son, but instead face the one threatening to kill all of us. I noticed a small knife that had landed nearby. While they spoke, I started to move slowly towards it, trying not to get their attention. Why the hell would I ever listen to a monster like you? My life would be well worth it if I can use it to kill a creature and the one who sided with them. My only regret would be that I couldn't kill more of you as revenge for my family. The hunter ranted. His hand shifted and my heart froze. I tensed, expecting death. But Charlotte stopped the hunter with her soft tone. Her hands were raised as if she was dealing with a wild, dangerous animal. In her eyes, maybe she was. What happened to your family? She asked, taking a very small step closer, causing the hunter to step back. He stuttered, never expecting a creature to ask with such genuine concern. He regained his rage and shouted back at her. They were torn apart. Something heartless like yourself slaughtered them. I was expecting to have a happy Christmas, but came home to a house of blood and horror. I swore on that day I would kill as many of you as I can to ensure that never happened to anyone else again. His voice was trembling from the memory of his past. Have you ever heard something so tragic it almost became a comedy? I was tied up. A man threatening us all with a magic bomb, and my only hope was a spider mother. Hearing that this hunter had the most tragic past imaginable almost made me want to laugh at how absurd the entire situation was. I only inhaled and bit the inside of my mouth to keep everything from spilling out. I'd never been scared to death, but also on the verge of laughing before. Neither of them noticed my emotional turmoil as Charlotte kept pressing, trying to talk the man down. I don't want my son to die, but I may be able to forgive you if you're able to answer this question. Does hunting creatures make you happy? Are you content when you kill one of us? Or do you just keep hating us? Is there ever going to be an end to all of this? She asked, still trying to close the distance between the two of them. As long as there are creatures alive, I'll still hate and hunt them until it kills me, he yelled, his face red. Is this what your family would have wanted? Charlotte asked. That question almost got us all killed. He screamed in rage and charged at her, snatching up a dagger off the table. He tried stabbing it into her chest stomach with one hand still on the paper bomb. The blade broke against Charlotte's skin. Instead of attacking back, she reached down to wrap her human arms around the hunter in an embrace that he struggled against. Billy's brothers and sisters were all killed by hunters. He was a sickly baby, so I had left with him to get treatment the day they slaughtered my children. They deemed my species unworthy to live because we take a human male's life to create children. I killed the ones who took my children. I'd forgotten my task of trying to get free in order to watch their exchange. I never would have thought Charlotte and the hunter had suffered through the same thing at one point. He shook his head, trying to not let her words affect him. But he wasn't trying to get free from her arms. You're still. My life is only worthy if I can kill creatures who would harm others. You still kill humans. I cannot forgive any of you for what you've done, he replied, but his voice was losing some strength. I really do dislike the hunter organization. They take hurt humans like yourself and force you down a never-ending road of revenge. This life is never going to make you happy. You'll just die alone. I realized that too late. I did kill the hunters who wronged my family, but I stopped myself before I took it too far. I could have kept killing, but there isn't any point to that. More people would be harmed by my actions, and it feeds into the never-ending cycle. You may be threatening my son's life, but I understand why and I forgive you. The hunter tried to move away, but Charlotte kept her grip tight. She wasn't trying to grab the spell, but instead held the man as if he was part of the family she'd lost. I can't forgive you creatures. I have to keep going. I have to, or else everything I've done is going to be for nothing. While those two were speaking, Ellie sneaked over to me. He used a dagger to cut me loose. I feared the movement would get the attention of the hunter. He appeared confused, but hadn't given up on his suicide mission yet. When Charlotte released the man, he looked far too distressed to move. She gently took his face in her hands so they could make eye contact. I didn't blame the hunter for not being able to pull away after seeing her expression. "It's not all worthless. You're still alive, and we got to meet each other," she said with a soft smile on her normally terrifying face. I think it would be less painful if she outright attacked the hunter instead of treating him so gently. He could deal with the idea of all the creatures being monsters that must be killed, not with the idea that some did harm humans. But at the same time could be as kind-hearted as a saint. He kept opening his mouth trying to respond, only to find himself at a loss for words. After Charlotte let her hands drop, the hunter looked down at the paper spell in his hand. Unable to go through with his threat, he tore the paper, breaking the circle and the spell. The stress in my shoulders only released when the paper dropped to the ground and the hunter gazed down, looking broken. He might have been giving Charlotte a chance to go back on her words and harm him. It would be easier for him to accept a creature was being nice only to attack him after the threat had passed. My face was still throbbing in pain. At least we weren't at risk of dying anytime soon and Lee had learned his lesson. I turned to him, really wanting to be angry over how he acted. In the end, the only negative outcome was the hunter breaking my nose. If Charlotte could forgive the one who nearly killed her son, I could forgive him. "Your mom is really nice," I said, finally breaking the silence between the two of us. "Yeah, I thought everyone only liked her because she, Lee started to move his hands over his chest trying to get his point across, being unable to outright mention his mother's obvious attributes. I punched his arm. It was a noticeable thing, but he shouldn't ever mention it, and I was still bitter about my nose. He got another punch because he flinched from the first one. Charlotte gathered us all up so she could get me some treatment and a clean shirt that wasn't stained in my own blood. She also took along the hunter who finally introduced himself as Matthew. He was so out of it he was just doing whatever she asked. Honestly, I didn't know what she was going to do with him. He couldn't return to being a hunter after sympathizing with a monster. If he was going to kill me for being concerned over Illy, if other hunters found out about tonight, they would do the same. The entire thing bothered me for a while. I didn't know what the outcome would be. A week after Charlotte hired me, I got a letter from her asking to meet in the park just to give me an update, figuring I may be curious. We met after dark. We were an odd-looking group and I was glad no one was around. I still got goosebumps just seeing her spider half. I dealt with it enough to walk over and greet Illy and Matthew. I received an embarrassed apology from Matthew for punching me in the face. In the past week, Charlotte somehow got this man to change his mind about what pushed him forward to kill. I really didn't know how she did it. I still think there are a lot of creatures who are a danger for humans, but I can see how wrong it was to just target everyone I'd come across. The hunters will kill me if they can, but Charlotte is going to use her power to protect me. I'm going to use my skills in crafting weapons for the corporation, so call me if you need anything," the now ex-hunter explained. I honestly felt a little bit proud of Matthew. He was still doing his best to ensure no one went through what he did, but also wasn't putting his life needlessly at risk doing so. Matthew also agreed to stay with me to show me how the human world works so I can go off on my own at some point. I don't know what I can do, but I hope to join the corporation someday, Illy announced. If I kept working with Nick, then maybe someday I would do a case with Illy. I hoped he had smartened up by then. Charlotte's eyes got misty again. This time it was because of how proud she was of the two of them. Unable to help it, she pulled them into a tight, embarrassing hug. Both protested. I snickered, and in revenge her arms turned on me next. I thought I was going to suffocate and nearly did before she finally pulled back. "I still owe you for this job. Don't be afraid to call on me for anything, because you heard me out. You saved Illy and brought Matthew to us. I don't know how I'll ever pay you back, but I'll try." Charlotte had a talent for embarrassing full-grown men. I exchanged numbers with Matthew, in case I planned on getting a magic sword at some point. I also got Illy's number just so he could practice using a cell phone with someone, or so he could ask a human questions in case Matthew was too busy. They all needed to be somewhere else and left shortly after the number exchange. I waved as they all started down the park pathway, Charlotte's legs clicking against the stone path. As I watched them leave, I considered how I felt about supernatural creatures. When I first found out about them, I'd assumed most acted like the witch in the woods, just downright evil creatures killing humans and that they needed to be taken out. Since then, I knew each creature was very different from the others. Some wouldn't harm anything, while others would do harm in order to live. There were also a few that had no redeeming qualities. It all felt complicated, somehow. Knowing all this nearly scared me more than if all the monsters in the dark were only just that. It was a very frightening idea that I could care so deeply for something that could kill me. I think I loved Charlotte a little. And yet I was scared of her. In fact, I loved a lot of the creatures I'd met in some sort of way. I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to make sense of my feelings while standing alone in a dark park. In the end, I headed back home thinking I didn't need to figure out my feelings yet. I could just carry on working and dealing with whatever came my way on a case-by-case basis.